As the New Orleans Saints begin their head coaching search, they've already got competition for a guy that's expected to be one of their top candidates. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, the Saints are traveling to take on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this weekend. Why they should compete in Tampa, because there's a guy on the other sideline that they should want to impress. We'll also take a look at why this New Orleans Saints job is more appealing than folks are giving it credit. And then we're going to kick everything off with a look at Mike Vrabel, who's already starting to garner some interest outside of New Orleans, meaning some competition for one of the New Orleans Saints' expected top candidates. We got all that and much more for you on today's episode. We appreciate you very much, whether it's your first time or your next time, for making Locked On Saints your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. You're going to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Hope that you don't mind. Before we get started today, just before we get to the football of it all, I just wanted to share a quick message of love to you, to the city of New Orleans, to everybody close and far away that was impacted by the senseless, heinous, and frankly cowardly terrorist attack that took place here in the great city of New Orleans. And share my condolences and love to anybody that, was injured or knows somebody that was injured or knows somebody that was lost, to the lives lost, all of it. I just wanted to share love. I grew up in this city. It's the only place I've ever known to truly call home. And the three things that I learned here are resilience, persistence, and perseverance. And I've seen it over and over again, from Hurricane Katrina to growing up here, both housed and unhoused. I have watched this city get punched and punched back. I've watched this city get knocked down and stand back up. And I have no doubt that this will just be another example of the resilience, the persistence, and the perseverance of the people of New Orleans, which helped to make this city energetic, vibrant, beautiful, and in my opinion, the greatest destination in the world. So I just wanted to share some love here before we got started today. After everything that has taken place this week, I hope that you are well. And again, I send my love and condolences to everybody impacted directly, indirectly, near, far, whatever it might be, after everything that happened over the course of this week. So we'll get to football, but I just wanted to take a moment. I hope that you'll entertain me with it. And thank you for your time. The New Orleans Saints are expected to have a couple of guys kind of already at the top of their list when it comes to their head coaching search. Of course, former defensive backs coach and now Detroit Lions defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn is a guy that kind of has the most connective tissue to New Orleans. But another name that has continuously popped up in the early goings of their coaching search has been former Tennessee Titans head coach Mike Vrabel. Now, if you caught our episode during the bye week, Tyler Rowland from Locked On Titans came here on the show and spoke about why he thought that Mike Vrabel would be a good fit for the New Orleans Saints, who have a blend of kind of veteran and youth on their roster, a lot of veteran on their roster, but also have some rebuilding to do, kind of culture things to fix up, all that, and spoke about why he would be a good fit. Well, it feels like a lot of people actually agree with that. And a lot of New Orleans Saints fans included. You have shared with me how much Mike Vrabel is somebody that you would actually like as a head coach here in New Orleans. And it seems like the New Orleans Saints are going to get a lot of competition when it comes to Mike Vrabel. And that competition has already begun. Mike Vrabel spent the 2024 season with the Cleveland Browns as a consultant, basically, and his consultant agreement expired early on this week, making him immediately available for interviews. So you don't have to wait for a team to be out of the playoffs. You don't have to wait to see if they get a bye week in the first week of the playoffs in order to interview Mike Vrabel. You can interview him now. And the New York Jets have already decided to do that. New York Jets are interviewing Mike Vrabel for their open head coaching position today on Friday, according to the ESPN Nation reporter over in New York. And that shows that the New Orleans Saints are going to have some competition for him. And don't forget, the Saints will also have competition for Aaron Glenn when it comes to New York Jets as well. Aaron Glenn, of course, a former defensive backs coach for the New Orleans Saints, having spent time in their coaching staff. But let's not forget that Aaron Glenn was also a first-round pick by the New York Jets back in the day until he would eventually go over to Houston following the expansion year. Or in the expansion year, rather. So the Saints and the Jets are going to be looking at a few of the same top guys over the course of this offseason. And some of the some of the NFL Network folks have already started to kind of take a look. Oh, no, it actually was ESPN. Sorry, it was an ESPN Plus article. It was Jeremy Fowler and Graziano, and they were talking about the number of head coaching positions that could potentially open up this offseason. And they were looking at as many as 8 or 9 potential jobs opening up. You already have the Bears, the Saints, and the Jets, of course, but they were looking at teams like the Giants, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Las Vegas Raiders. They even had some question marks around the Dallas Cowboys. Mike McCarthy, head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, his contract is set to expire on January 14th, which would give him an opportunity to either go back to Dallas or potentially look and see what other kinds of opportunities are out there. They also looked at a couple of other teams, like maybe a surprise like the Indianapolis Colts or the Tennessee Titans, something like that could potentially also end up coming open. So the Saints are going to have at least probably another, we'll call it 6 job openings to compete with, 5 or 6 job openings to compete with. And so there's going to be competition for those top options. And we're already seeing it for Mike Vrabel. We'll certainly see if the Detroit Lions win Sunday night as they take on the Minnesota Vikings in what is a huge matchup between 14-2 teams. I mean, what an incredible matchup to be the last regular season game of the season. But if the Detroit Lions win that game, then there's a chance that over the course of that bye week that guys like Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn can start to take some interviews. Otherwise, you'll kind of have to wait and then see what happens throughout the playoffs. But I would expect that the Saints would be one of the first teams in line to interview Aaron Glenn. They'll be one of the first teams in line after the New York Jets to interview Mike Vrabel after their season comes to an end on Sunday. It is interesting, though, to see like the Jets are already doing their head coaching interviews. The Saints seem to be waiting until the season is completely over. Now, does that put the Saints at any kind of a disadvantage? No, because no head coach is going to go and interview with one team and then agree to be that one team's head coach. That's not a reality. That's not something you actually have to be worried about if you're the New Orleans Saints. And we'll have to see what happens with the Detroit Lions coordinators, because there's a chance that Ben Johnson doesn't take a job until after the Super Bowl, for all we know. And he could be the first domino that everybody's waiting to see where does Ben Johnson land, and then the rest of the head coaching positions end up getting filled up. So as long as he's in the running for some teams, those teams are probably going to wait all the way down until he makes his decision if he's a part of their final conversation. So there's not going to be any situation here where you look at the New Orleans Saints and go, oh, they should have started when Mike Vrabel became available at the beginning of the week in week 18. And because they didn't do that, they've lost all their top candidates. No, that's not a reality. That's not going to happen. But the competition's going to be there in terms of the availability, the interest from other teams, all of those other bits. So when it comes to the people that we've already heard kind of connected to New Orleans, obviously Aaron Glenn and Mike Vrabel are the guys that are on top of the list, big names to watch. We've heard, if Mike McCarthy ends up becoming available, that he could be somebody, since the Saints do know him, that could end up being of interest to New Orleans. We've also heard additional names like John Gruden, of course, which we discussed in a couple of episodes ago. So we'll see exactly where things continue to shake out over the course of this early portion of the offseason, the early goings of this head coaching search. But make no mistake about it, for the Saints' top candidates, they certainly won't be alone in the venture. And there are only going to be more teams that are going to be opening up positions and that are going to be potentially competing for what it is that the New Orleans Saints, or who it is that the New Orleans Saints consider as their top candidates for their open head coaching job. Coming up next, let's take a look at the things that make this New Orleans Saints team actually a little bit more appealing than folks are willing to give it credit. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by friends at PrizePicks, the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. It's not you versus a bunch of mystery lineups. It's not you fighting for a small slice of an even smaller pie or pool of money. No, it's you and your football knowledge or baseball or basketball knowledge, whatever it is that you love. You and your knowledge of your favorite sport, favorite teams, favorite players versus the house. Look, this is how it works. PrizePicks looks at all the players that are participating in whatever game that might be going on that day, and they will give a stat projection for that player. So let's take a look at the NFL, right? Jared Goff, 230 and a half passing yards. Do you think he's going to go more or less than that up against the Minnesota Vikings? You choose more or less. You do that for 2 to 6 players. Win a couple of those, you win up to 1,000 times your money back. Yeah. PrizePicks is that awesome. I absolutely love PrizePicks. You will too. Go and check them out today. You can download the PrizePicks app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get you $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's $50 instantly on your first $5 lineup with the PrizePicks app and promo code LOCKEDONNFL. And you can check them out today over at PrizePicks. Run your game. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. I'm going to take a moment to do another personal thing here. I use BetterHelp, and let's just say BetterHelp got a lot of work with me over the course of this week, because it's been kind of a crazy and confusing week here in the city of New Orleans and everything. And I wish I could say that this is the first time that I've experienced something like this, but being here and living in other major cities and stuff like that, unfortunately, this is just something that I feel all too familiar with. And maybe that's not the right thing, but that was a really confusing thing to kind of come to terms with. And so therapy was very helpful for me over the course of this week, if I'm just being completely honest. And BetterHelp has been huge because of the accessibility, my ability to just be able to jump on with somebody via video call, even just to be able to do like a chat, like just to be able to type stuff out to somebody and everything. It's awesome. So look, if you've been thinking about therapy, and I highly recommend it, make sure you go and try BetterHelp. BetterHelp has been awesome for me. I think they can be awesome for you as well. Go and check them out today. You can go to betterhelp.com/lockedon. You'll get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, family. I think the New Orleans Saints head coaching position is getting a bad rap because it's fun and it's easy to attack it, right? Financials, people don't like the general manager, all these other things. But I do think that this job is more appealing than people are willing to give it credit. And I've got 3 reasons why. Before I get to those reasons, let me set up why people don't think that this is a very appealing position. People will talk about the financials. The New Orleans Saints are $63 million over the salary cap going into 2025. Valid. Understood. We'll come back to that. No long-term answer at quarterback. You've got potential in terms of long-term answers at quarterback, but you don't have your franchise quarterback that is, 3 years of starting experience, but still on a rookie deal. You got a 5th-year option on them, and because you drafted him in the first round. Like the long-term outlook of what it looks like to have that guy versus to have the potential of that guy is seen as very different in the NFL. So no long-term solidified answer at quarterback. You got the potential, but you don't have the guy that's got 2 years of starting experience, but still on a rookie contract with a 5th-year option, yada, yada, yada. People will point to the front office and the general manager. I think it's actually a plus for those head coaches. So I'll get to that in a moment. But people, I think, incorrectly designate the New Orleans Saints front office as a reason that people would not want to be a part of this organization. And then finally, talent on the roster. I think a lot of people talk about the aging roster and all those other things. So those are the reasons that people say that this is not an appealing job for new head coaches, former head coaches that are looking for another head coaching opportunity and all those other things. And let me say, I don't think that those criticisms are unwarranted, right? Those could very well be reasons that people would not want the head coaching job at any other organization, right? Front office, no long-term answer at quarterback, salary cap issues, aging roster, all this stuff. I completely get it. But here's the 3 reasons why I don't think that those things are as much a deterrent as people will say. And before actually we get to that, let me say this too. We've gone through this conversation several times. You'll probably remember last year when the Saints were looking for an offensive coordinator, everybody said that no one would want to join, no one would want to work with Dennis Allen, no one would want to come to New Orleans, no one would want to be the New Orleans Saints offensive coordinator. They're going to have to hire somebody that they don't want, all these other things. And they got one of the top two names that were on the list. The top two names that were in the market last year for offensive coordinator were Zach Robinson, who ended up going with his friend Raheem Morris over to Atlanta, and then Clint Kubiak, who did indeed take the job here in New Orleans. Then, before everybody decided that they hated Derek Carr, when Derek Carr was being courted by the New Orleans Saints as well as the New York Jets, so kind of they'll be revisiting a little bit of that duel when it comes to head coaches this offseason. But when it came down to those two teams, people were saying, well, Derek Carr's definitely not going to go to New Orleans because it's not a good situation. And no, why would anyone want to go to New Orleans, and Dennis Allen and all this other stuff? And then what did Derek Carr do? He came here to New Orleans. Now, since then, they haven't done a lot of winning together. So I understand the criticism there. But before even you had the opportunity to criticize Derek Carr, people were saying Derek Carr would not choose New Orleans because New Orleans was not a good destination. And in both cases, those people ended up here in New Orleans. Same thing happened with Tyrann Mathieu. Tyrann Mathieu signed here. Same thing happened with Chase Young. Chase Young signed here, so on and so forth. You get it. So all I'm saying is that it's a recycled narrative, and I understand the criticism, right? Because there has not been a lot of winning, has not been nearly enough winning here in New Orleans over the course of the past 4 years. And now when you have the benefit of hindsight to look back at some of the bad decisions that were made and stuff like that could have been great decisions had it been followed up with winning, it's easy to kind of sit back and go, well, this is the dumps, this is the dregs. And I will say the Saints hit rock bottom this season, but rock bottom for them in terms of their ability to be able to pivot away from that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to that they're in the same type of rock bottom as, a really bad franchise or something like that. So here are the three reasons why I think that the Saints' job is actually more appealing than people think. And the first reason is the front office. Look, I understand I'm going to become like an enemy of the state by saying this, but I don't think Mickey Loomis is going anywhere over the course of this offseason, whether it means him being appointed to a new position or whether it means him being moved on from. I do think that this is his last chance, potentially, in terms of hiring a head coach and proving that he can build a successful team. I think this is an incredibly important offseason or series of off seasons for him. This is an incredibly important hire for him, although he won't solely make the hiring decision. Everybody kind of goes, well, Mickey Loomis, no matter who the head coach is, it's not going to work because Mickey Loomis is going to hire them. It's not like Mickey Loomis goes out by himself and hires the head coach. It's a joint venture between Mickey Loomis and Gail Benson and Dennis Lauscha and several others. Like, it's not just one guy that makes that choice. And so the reason why I think that the front office is actually a benefit for New Orleans is because New Orleans has proven to a fault that they will be patient. And I think when you're hiring in the offseason, typically what you're hiring is either a head coach that failed somewhere else or someone that's never been a head coach before. And in both of those scenarios, you're going to need patience. And in both of those scenarios, those people are going to want patience because either it's their first time being a head coach, so they would want patience to be able to grow into the role, or they have been somewhere that didn't show them patience before, and so they want to be shown patience in their next role. The New Orleans Saints, to a fault, will show patience and will probably give up a little bit of control as well. It's one of the reasons why I don't think that Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions, truly, completely turns his nose up at the New Orleans Saints because of the amount of roster control they'd be willing to give them, that they've shown they can be successful with in the past, as long as that head coach can be successful, so on and so forth. So I do think that patience, alignment, as well as a little bit of control are all things that kind of lump into one thing, one of my three reasons, which is the front office. The other thing is the franchise. And what I mean by the franchise is I mean the destination being the New Orleans Saints. It's probably not looked at the same way as like joining a historied franchise like the Dallas Cowboys or the New York Jets or something like that. I understand that. But the recent success of the New Orleans Saints, which if we go back to 2006 to now, has been a vast majority of the time successful, still carries a reputation of a successful organization within the confines of the NFL. Has the team been successful on the field? No, right? Because they've missed the playoffs each of the last 4 years and everything like that. But remember, the reason why everybody is so upset with the fact that the Saints have not made the playoffs in the last 4 years is because they're used to making the playoffs. And that's what happens when you are successful. It's where eventually you're not successful anymore, but the expectation of success is still very much there. And so I do think that that also works in favor of the New Orleans Saints because we have to remember ego. Ego in the NFL, ego in professional sports, ego in life. is what makes decisions, right? Aside from money. And so the way that I look at it is any head coach that looks at the New Orleans Saints is probably going to say, I can get them back to where they were. And I can be the thing that fixed them. I can be the thing that makes them better. I think that ends up being something as well. And then finally, it's not that challenging to get out of the financial situation that the New Orleans Saints are in. $63 million over the salary cap going into next season, but then $50 million over the salary cap the season after that, and then over $100 million over the salary, under the salary cap the year after that. So even with restructuring some contracts this year, which the Saints will do, it's not going to be a major detriment to them. Let's say that the Saints keep Derek Carr, because that's probably the biggest kind of financial question mark, right? Let's just say that they keep Derek Carr in 2025. If they do that, then they're restructuring his contract, $30 million saved up against that. Do that. Reduce Ryan Ramczyk's base salary down to base minimum, allow him to retire after as the season begins. You can do it post June 1. He can literally wait until after June 1 to do it without being designated post June 1. Eric McCoy, restructure Eric McCoy, Carl Granderson, Cesar Ruiz, and Pete Werner, all guys that are going to be a part of your future anyway. You're probably moving on from some guys, Jamal Williams, Cedric Wilson Jr. You can make a couple of other smaller cuts towards the bottom of the roster as well. But by the time you do that, you're $4 million under the salary cap with guys like Cam Jordan, Alvin Kamara, Taysom Hill, Demario Davis, Tyrann Mathieu, and others to either restructure or approach for a pay cut. And then that makes you money to be able to spend over the course of the offseason. Making all those moves and quote unquote kicking the can down the road, Saints still $57 million over the salary cap. Now that gets impacted once some of the dead money accelerates in the next year and stuff like that, but those are all things that you can plan for going into 2027, $209 million over the salary cap according to Over the Cap. So what I'm saying here is when coaches make decisions about joining a team, they don't do what the public does, which is what's the situation right now. They look at what's the situation for me over the course of the next 5 years. And if any head coach out there wants to land at a place where they can kind of help to guide through the rebuild and then completely retool this team within 2 or 3 years, the New Orleans Saints are a fantastic destination for exactly that. Coming up next, let's take a look at why the New Orleans Saints, with that in mind, should also still be looking to compete in Tampa Bay, regardless of the Atlanta Falcons or their own draft situation. Let's get to that next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and where you can go to make the most of the final week of the NFL season, the playoffs on the way, and of course the college football playoffs already underway. I was at the Notre Dame and Georgia game. Awesome game. Way to go, Notre Dame. My goodness. But over at FanDuel, you can get in on all of that, whether it comes down to drive bets. I did a couple of drive bets during that game. That was a lot of fun. You can do things like other live betting, or of course, just get in on the standard stuff, spread, money line, over, under in terms of point total, all that other stuff. Saints right now in terms of spread, 13.5 point underdogs going up against Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the Buccaneers, a heavy favorite. So with that in mind, if you're a new FanDuel customer, you can put down $5 and win $250 in bonus bets as your first bet over it with FanDuel if you win that first $5 bet. So put that $5 down on a heavy favorite like Tampa Bay Buccaneers and walk away with $250 in bonus bets. So you can make every moment more over at FanDuel.com. Today, it's where you're going to want to go to get started. It's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Again, you can make every moment more with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints could go into Tampa with draft capital and draft position on the mind. The Atlanta Falcons on the mind even, or they could go in with the people of New Orleans on their mind. And I think it will be the latter. I think it should be the latter as well. We appreciate you very much for being here for another episode of Locked On Saints. Make it us your first listen and for being here with us. We'll have another episode for you tomorrow to where we're going to be taking a look at 5 things you need to know going into the game. I'll be hosting the Saints pre and post game shows, so you'll be able to find that at NewOrleansSaints.com as well as on the Saints YouTube page. And of course, we'll be live here after the game. And then Mock Draft Monday on Monday as well, because I think everyone's ready to turn the page on this this 2024 New Orleans Saints season and see kind of the exciting things or potentially exciting things that could happen. Everything could go poorly for the New Orleans Saints this offseason. I don't know. We'll find out. But I think that the best way for them to set themselves up to make sure that things don't go poorly this offseason is actually to go out there and compete against Tampa. Let's face it, the New Orleans Saints are completely outmatched going into this game. They're still injured on offense. It's unlikely they're going to get any big pieces back this week. No Derek Carr, no Alvin Kamara still made it out to practice. We'll see if that changes today. But I don't think you're like looking at this team and going like, oh, okay, all of a sudden they're going to be able to go out there and compete with a playoff team and a team that's atop the division. And that's also facing a win and in scenario when it comes to the playoffs. Tampa Bay Buccaneers are. So the Bucs have a lot of reason to play here, but I think the Saints have a lot of reason to compete here, right? I don't think that competing is the same as winning, right? I mean, we know that's not always the case. So I don't think that people should look down on the New Orleans Saints for going out there and trying to win, putting forth the effort to win, competing, playing for the city with everything that the city's been through this week, all that other stuff. So there's a lot of little things that you can find in terms of like, oh, well, the Saints shouldn't do this. They shouldn't even try all this stuff. No, go out there and try. And one of the biggest reasons why is because, and maybe this is just personal to me because he's one of my favorite candidates in this potential coaching search, is that Liam Coen, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive coordinator, is on the other side, right? On that other sideline over in Tampa. And Liam Coen did a really good job against you the last time that you both met. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers scored a total of 51 points, 44 of which put up by Liam Coen's offense. And so when you're looking at potential head coaching candidates out there, Liam Coen should be a guy that's on the radar of the New Orleans Saints. I mean, he was a guy that was kind of, quote, in the mix, if I can borrow from Nick Underhill's report from a few years ago, when it came to the Saints offensive coordinator position years ago. He ultimately was not offered the job, but a lot has changed since then. And so could he be a guy that ends up becoming a solid candidate for the New Orleans Saints? I think they should interview him. I mean, we've seen the leap that Dave Canales made from Tampa, working as their offensive coordinator, spending time with Baker Mayfield, and then making the leap over to being the head coach with the Carolina Panthers. And the Carolina Panthers effectively said, we don't care what our record is at the end of the season. We care, does Bryce Young look better at week 18 than he did week 1? And I think you will find that they will be very pleased with what they've seen out of Bryce Young as of late. The rest of the team is abysmal, but not the rest of the team, but like a lot of the stuff that's around Bryce Young is still abysmal, still needs a lot of work. But once you get the quarterback right, you get the quarterback right. And so they've done a really good job of moving him in the right direction while he's still on that rookie contract. Again, that's the difference between having the potential of a future starter versus having your future at quarterback. And the Panthers feel they have their future at quarterback. And so when you're out there as the New Orleans Saints on Sunday going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and you're looking across that sideline at Liam Coen, you're looking to show Liam Coen what you have, whether it's the young quarterback in Spencer Rattler, whether it's some other young talent around the team, whether it's the defense, if the defense, which is majority healthy, can just kind of get it together a little bit and, a little bit better than they have over the course of the past few weeks. You're showing something, right? Even just resilience, fight, perseverance, persistence, the things that we talked about as being the identifiers of the city of New Orleans. If you can go and embody those things as a team, and I think guys like Foster Moreau, people like Tyrann Mathieu and others, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, like they all get it. Right? They all very much get it. And every single one of these New Orleans Saints get it. Cam Jordan's not from here, but he considers New Orleans home. He has seen what happened. He donated $25,000 to the New Orleans New Year's Day tragedy fund, which, by the way, I'm going to put a link in the description in case you would like to contribute as well. But everybody gets it. And so I think that going out there and showing something, even though it doesn't mean that you're going to win, right? It doesn't mean you're going to put a point on the board. But if you go out there and you show something intangible, you show something that is the idea of what is bigger than yourself as a team, as an individual football player, whatever it might be, I think that moves the needle for this team. And it moves the needle for coaching candidates. It'll move the needle for some fans. And I think it moves the needle for that team and for those individual players. And I think that's important. I think that's an important thing. And, I get it. Like, you're not supposed to like moral victories and stuff because tough guy NFL, blah, blah, blah. Well, moral victory is probably the best you're going to get right now. So freaking take it. You know what I mean? And go out there and get it. Go out there and grab it. Like, go out there and do that. And so I think that becomes a really important part of this weekend's matchup between the New Orleans Saints and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is prove something. Prove something. Doesn't have to be what you prove on the scoreboard. Doesn't have to be what you prove in the win-loss column. Prove something on that field with attitude, with grit, with perseverance, persistence, resilience, whatever it might be. Prove something on that football field that makes someone else look at you and say, I want to be a part of that. That's what I think the New Orleans Saints have a chance to do this weekend up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, if they go up on that field, the last time that they were the last time they were underdogs by, double-digit points, they got shut out and they got blown out 34-0. So as long as that doesn't happen again, I think you're in a good place. And again, forgive me for being the positive person for a second here today, but I think that we know what this New Orleans Saints team is dealing with. We know what this New Orleans Saints team failed to do this season, win games. We know what this New Orleans Saints team wasn't this season, which was a good football team. We know these things, right? And it's fun to cast the aspersions, I'm sure, and all these other things. But here's the truth. The Saints have everything in front of them available now to fix it. They have an open head coaching position. They have an open defensive coordinator position. They have the ability to change their offensive scheme if they want to, or give Clint Kubiak a second season for the first time in his entire career as an offensive play caller to be comfortable. They have the opportunity to make changes on their roster, to invest in their future, to build their depth. They have the draft capital for a change. They have money available to them that they can make. They have the ability to invest in their future, even if it means one more season of suck. You know what I mean? You go through it. That's what the New Orleans Saints have ahead of them. But here's the thing. Everything that has been wrong with this team over the course of 2024, every mechanism to change it, address it, fix it, and dare I say even improve it over the course of the next few years. I maintain that this is not a one-year project here in New Orleans, but every mechanism that they need to be available to them will be available to them starting this offseason. So you might as well go into that offseason with some type of showing that says we're ready to be better in the coming years. And I think the New Orleans Saints have that opportunity up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Again, forgive me for being the positive guy. I know it's annoying. I understand. But it's not really about being positive. It's about being realistic. And the realistic situation here is the New Orleans Saints have not been good here in 2024. The New Orleans Saints have the mechanisms, strategies, everything available to them. If they can get them right, they can get back to being good in the next few years. And so that starts in Tampa, as far as I'm concerned. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being here with us and for making us your first listen. For your second listen, make sure you go and check out Locked On NFL. Myself and Tyler Rowland breaking down some of the biggest matchups this weekend. And of course, we'll be back with you tomorrow. 5 things to know. Sunday, after the game, live, covering it, win or loss. And then Monday, right back to Mock Draft Monday, introducing you to a slew of brand new prospects that we haven't discussed here on the show as well. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.